Good morning, Timberwolves. This is Mr. Helms. Hope everybody is having a lovely quarantine. What I wanted to do is, after reading some of the students' work and giving feedback, one of the common problems we're having is trying to remind the students of the expectations of analyzing their sources and citing textual evidence. So I'm using this crash course to remind the students of the expectations, as well as give the parents an idea of my expectations and show you a lesson I went through with the kids at the beginning of the year, so you can kind of get an idea of the expectations I have. So when you're looking over your kids' work, you can kind of see the level of expectation that I have as their teacher. So one thing we told the kids at the beginning of the year is, when we do sources, we do it in 3 different chunks. You read it, you evaluate it, and you corroborate it. Okay? And I'm going to go through what those 3 things mean in relation to the expectations for what I have for the students. So first and foremost, the students are historians. We're teaching them all to be historians. And what historians need are historical thinking skills. So they need to be able to evaluate evidence from sources. They need to be able to analyze different people's interpretations, as well as be able to create their own interpretations based off facts. Okay? And one thing that we do teach them is everybody has their own truth. All right? Facts are personal to people. Everybody has their own point of view, which to them is a fact. Okay? It may not be your fact, but it still is a fact. And they must use those facts to create their own interpretations of that historical event. We want them to think for themselves. The common complaint is, Mr. Helms, why can't you just tell us what the answer is? That's not the goal of history. That means I'm telling you what to think. I want you to think for yourself. So as they're thinking for themselves, we want them to look at patterns in history, because those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. All right? And finding those patterns can help you analyze modern day history. For example, one pattern in history is, every time we have a crisis, a wave of nationalism hits. So as of right now, we're having the coronavirus crisis. So based on historical patterns, when we have a unifying issue, we tend to have a wave of nationalism that comes afterwards. Okay? War of 1812, Great Depression, World War II, 9/11. After all of those major events, the American people united over a singular cause. This could be a unifying cause that, gets rid of that division for a time and creates a more unified country. So again, it's a pattern, not a guarantee. But analyzing patterns over time can help you as a historian analyze what's to come. We also teach them to think critically about different issues, from government to pop culture. Everybody is biased. Okay? Everybody has their own truth. Everybody has their own set of facts, and they all come from a place. But the goal is for students to be able to not only analyze others and be able to analyze people who are different from them, but also to analyze themselves and find out, why am I different? Why do I think the way I think? And the things I think, are they the right way all the time? And is there room for commonality? And that's the thing. You're not trying to change everybody's minds, but you're trying to create a level of understanding between different people from a variety of backgrounds. And hopefully through this class, they can analyze different events and figure out what those differences and those commonalities are. So the first step is reading a primary source. Now, a primary source is anything that is a first-hand account. So anything that was written during the time period. And it could be a speech, it could be a law, it could be an article, it could be a diary entry. Modern day, it could be a video, it could be a voice recording, it could be music, it could be artwork, maps. Anything is a primary source that was done during that time period, a first-hand account. So the first step is they must find out the context of that event. They must find out the background information. That's simply what context is: background information. Time period, who was all involved, where did it take place, what was the outcome. All these things are context that you have to understand in order to know what was going on. If you know that a source was written in 1860 by a white Southerner in South Carolina, you know that that piece is probably going to be pro-slavery. So going into it, you already know what to expect. You already know what the topic's going to be about. You may not know exactly what's going to be discussed, but you kind of already have a good understanding of what he is going to talk about. The next thing they do is then they actually have to read the text. Okay, so first find the background information, then actually read what is written. Text is fact. What exactly was written. Okay, that was what happened. You can't change it. That's what happened. Okay, now it can be interpreted differently by different people based on your own understanding, but what was written is fact. Okay, and they take what was written and with the context, and they create what's called subtext. They use that evidence to make connections to different parts of history, and that is when we ask them to do their writing, to their ace paragraph. That is what they must do. Look at the subtext and make their interpretations. So text, context, subtext. Background information, context, text, what is written, what was said, and then subtext, reading between the lines, asking questions. Who, why, for what reason, how, those are the types of questions you might ask. Now, why is context important? Well, look at this picture. Now, if you didn't see the American flag in there, you'd think, oh, this is probably Nazi Germany, 1930s. However, this salute was known as the Bellamy salute. Prior to Nazi Germany, this was the common way that American children said the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, post 1930s and Nazi Germany, said Hitler used this salute for Nazi Germany. This got changed from the Bellamy salute to the Nazi salute. But the context of understanding what was going on is if you looked at a picture like this and you knew it was from the 1920s or the 1910s, you'd probably be less offended because that the context that we know of the Nazi salute did not exist during that time period. So understanding the context, understanding the background information will help you ultimately understand the primary source, i.e. the primary source in this case are these pictures. So after you read the primary sources, then you evaluate the sources. Okay? So you have to ask questions. The key question is, who do you believe? When you're looking at a variety of sources, which sources do you believe? Now, historians aren't lying. You can't say anyone is lying. Okay? There's truth behind every source. Okay? There's more to it than what you just read. Okay? There's purpose behind it. There's why. And there's how. Okay? And that's the thing you always got to think about. So, for example, looking at these. All right, so we're going to look at number 3 real quick. What was the layout of the Nazi concentration camp Auschwitz? Now, an interview with an 80-year-old Holocaust survivor in 1985, pretty reliable source. They were there as a first-hand account. Okay? However, they may not know the whole layout of the concentration camp because maybe they weren't allowed everywhere. So if I'm trying to answer the question, what was the layout of the Nazi concentration camp, I may not want to use source 1. I might want to use source 2, a map of the concentration camp found in Nazi files, because who would know more about the layout of the camp than the people who designed it? Okay? So understanding the question and then analyzing the sources and figuring out which one might be the most reliable. Not to mention an 80-year-old may not have the best memory. Okay? And so the map is more in this case. So it's more reliable. Now you can look at the 80-year-old Holocaust survivor and you can take pieces of what they said and use that to help you answer what the layout was, because they might know more expertly the area in which they were stored, but as a whole, that would not be the best source. So the corroboration of sources. So after you evaluate them, figure out what the truth is, then the idea is to corroborate which facts are the most reliable. And you do that through corroboration. Now, corroboration is very simple. It's basically the more people that agree on that fact, the more reliable that fact is. So if I've got 5 different sources and 4 of them agree about this event and what happened in it, then that is probably what's fact. The one that didn't agree is probably less factual. Okay, so it's always more convincing when more than one person agrees. But it's even more convincing if people who disagree actually agree. So if a Republican and a Democrat agree on something being a fact, it's probably way more reliable than 2 Republicans or 2 Democrats agreeing on a fact. Okay? And so that's simply what corroboration is. All right? Taking multiple facts and looking at who all agrees. And that's how you find out the simple truth. Okay? And that's the reason why in research, teachers ask their kids to have more than 3 sources or 5 sources. Because one of the requirements is if you can find the same fact in 3 or more sources, it is reliable. Okay, and that's the reason why I always ask for them to go beyond and look for more information each time. Now, what does all this look like once they put it together? Once they read it, Once they evaluate it, once they corroborate it, then what do? How do they produce it for something that I can look at to figure out whether they understood it or not? So what we do is we do it in ACE paragraph form. Okay, ACE, answer, cite, explain. Okay, so here's an example. How do animals survive in the cold? So the answer is animals survive in cold places with adaptations. Okay, there's your answer. What are some details of that? Well, they have fur and blubber to stay warm. Okay, well, prove it to me. You said it, prove it. All right, well, here's my evidence. Here's my citation of evidence. According to the text, thick fur and blubber provide insulation for Arctic animals. They gave me a quote textual evidence from the documents. Okay, and then they explain it. This means that body adaptations help them to stay warm in the cold. All right, so they answered the question, they cited evidence, and then they explained it. Okay, now what does that look like with history? So the question we're going to look at is, how were the Yamasee impacted by their relationship with the Europeans? So the first step the kids will do is to answer that question, they've got to look at the documents. So here's some documents. They might look at the layout of a Yamasee town, read some background information on the Yamasee, the context. Then they might look at an act or a law that involved the Yamasee. Okay. Then they might look at an entry from a Indian trader who engaged with the Yamasee. Okay. They might look at another act, a land lease act that involved the Yamasee. So by looking at all of those, they will answer the question ultimately, how were the Yamasee impacted by the relationship with Europeans? And then they would put that into an ACE paragraph form. Okay, so this is what that looks like as a whole. But how does that look like broken down? Okay, so answer the question is in blue. The Yamasee and South Carolina relationship started out beneficial to both sides, but by 1717 ended in a war that harmed the future of the Yamasee tribe in South Carolina. So the answer to the question, how are the Yamasee impacted by the relationship with the Europeans? It started out beneficial, but ended in a war. Okay, there's your viewpoint, there's your opinion. Okay, now what are some supporting details of that? Why did that event happen? Okay, the conflict was caused by increased tensions over trade and settler encroachment, as well as by a growing rivalry between Spain and England. Okay, so you said it started out beneficial, but ended in war. Well, why did that happen? Well, it happened over trade and settler encroachment. Okay, boom. You gave me your answer. You gave me some reasons why. Now, the most important step is prove it. What in those documents, these documents right here, proves that settler encroachment and trade were the cause of that tension? Well, according to source 3, the Yamasee Indian towns in the South Carolina Lowcountry, unscrupulous and abusive traders have manipulated the Yamasee into an overwhelming debt. Okay, you just proved it to me. You cited textual evidence. This is the biggest problem I've had with students in being able to actually go back and prove to me their answer. Find something in the documents. This is the one thing that most students tend to neglect. All right. Now, what does that mean? So the next step is they have to actually explain it. So the last step in ACE is they explain it. This reflects that while the Indian commissioners attempted to mediate between the two sides, the lack of laws and punishments against the traders forced the Yamasee to defend what they were promised. Okay. So basically, South Carolina didn't police themselves. Okay. They allowed the abuse, which hurt the Native Americans. And that ultimately leads to war and tension could have easily been avoided had South Carolina stood up to its own settlers. Okay, so all of this goes from answering the question, supporting it, citing it, and explaining it. Okay, and they sum up in their own words. All right. Now, the last thing we kind of told the kids that they can always reflect back this if any of this is a problem. So at the beginning of the year, we taught them this thing called a lunchroom fight. They were the principal of a school. And this goes for any type of historical detail, any type of question. You are the principal. Okay? You found out there was a fight. You must figure out who was at fault. So you go through and you look at different sources. You look at different people. You interview the people who witnessed it. And then you try to corroborate who are telling the same facts. And you try to corroborate who was right and who was wrong. It's the exact same thing in any historical document. You are the historian, you're the principal, and you're analyzing the different documents, the witnesses, and figuring out what really happened in that historical event. And you're answering it, you're proving it from the sources, and then you're explaining what all that means. Okay, so I hope this crash course really helps you, and please go back and look at this.